My name is Firooz Zahedi, and I became friends with Elizabeth Taylor about 35 years ago. It was a wonderful beginning. It was like as if someone had written a script, the introduction, the way it went. And I met her through my cousin who was dating her, and then he asked me to look after her. And one thing led to another. This was back in Washington, D.C., where I was a student at the Corcoran School of Art. Prior to that, I'd been a diplomat working for the Iranian government, the previous Iranian government, not this one. And so I always wanted to be an artist, and I'd sort of started doing photography and became keen on photography, but wasn't sure if that was something I would succeed at. And I wasn't really getting encouragement from my family because, becoming an artist to them was an alien subject. So they sort of filled me with a lot of insecurities. They made me feel like I would never succeed, I would never make any money. And when I met Elizabeth and I told her about, my background, and she encouraged me to do exactly what I wanted to do, and went on to support me and get me work and take me with her to Hollywood. So we became closer and closer and closer, and until she died, the day she died, I was photographing her house for Architectural Digest. And it was a very sort of sad day, in fact, because I had to finish the job whilst I knew that she had just passed away. But it was a full cycle of knowing her for 35 years until the very end. So in the beginning, I'm going to see if I can start this thing here. Okay. So we met in Washington, and I have a few pieces I want to read from the book. And if I rest on one slide, forgive me, but that's more appropriate. But so we met at the embassy. My cousin invited her to come. My cousin was the ambassador from Iran at that point. He invited her to come and stay at the embassy. And then he said to me, I was having dinner with him when he made this arrangement, and he said, I want you to come and help look after Elizabeth Taylor with me. And I was 26 years old. I was about to have my finals at the Corcoran School of Art, and I had to make a decision. Do I pay attention to my finals, or do I look after Elizabeth Taylor? And I made the decision to spend my time with Elizabeth Taylor. So we put together a brunch for her at the embassy, and a small group of people were invited, and we were all anticipating, Elizabeth Taylor, the movie star, to arrive. So I'm going to read a little piece from the book here. Can you still hear me? Is that good? Not well? Is that good? Because I can't see the book and read. Okay, let me see. At noon, and so at noon the following Sunday, a group of about a dozen of the ambassador's select friends, including another highly eligible Washington bachelor, the former Secretary of the Navy, John Warner, gathered on the terrace of the ambassador's residence for brunch. Oh, you can't hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Is that better? No? Yes? No? Make up your minds. Okay. Many dignitaries had been entertained there in the past, but this day's guest of honor was generating more excitement than all her predecessors combined. We were all smartly dressed in anticipation of meeting the glamorous Hollywood movie star. It was a pleasantly warm and sunny day, with blossoming trees creating the perfect backdrop for the occasion. I'd supervised the staff and helped select the menu. Several round tables covered in crisp white linen were set with fine china and silverware. Servers glided about with trays of drinks and crystal glasses. When the doorbell finally rang, the butler put down his tray and rushed to the front door, followed closely by my cousin, who wanted to personally greet his famous house guest. Those of us gathered on the terrace lowered our voices, and all eyes turned towards the French doors leading out to the terrace in anticipation of getting our first glimpse of Liz. Elizabeth, a few inches above 5 feet tall, walked out into the sunlight wearing faded bell-bottom jeans and a floral t-shirt with her little feet tucked into a pair of well-worn canvas espadrilles. Admittedly, like most of the guests, I was expecting a more dramatic movie star entrance. Regardless, we were all captivated by what seemed to be a special aura that surrounded her. Led by my cousin, she made her way from one guest to the next and introduced herself with a pleasant and slightly shy smile affixed on her face. The understated attire was soon forgotten, as each time she shook someone's hand, her 33-carat crop diamond sparkled so brightly that one almost had to squint. When Elizabeth sat down in the shade and removed her sunglasses, every guest seemed to turn at once to see the color of her eyes, which had been described as violet blue, framed with double thick black lashes. To this day, I can't be sure of their exact color, but what I can be sure of was the way Elizabeth looked at you. It was a look that made you feel that at that particular moment, you were the only person on earth she was interested in. I couldn't get over the fact that she was so completely opposite to what I'd expected. She was down to earth, charming, and approachable. So that's one piece. So we got to know each other really well, and within 24 hours or so, we became great friends. I think we both saw something in each other. I mean, she had just separated for the second time from Richard Burton and was going through a tough time. And I was feeling kind of insecure about my future. You know, once I graduate, what's going to happen? Will I get work as a photographer or not? I guess the bonding came about because of that. But, you know, it was just maybe more than that. I don't know what it was, but, you know, sometimes a friendship develops between two people and there's no, you know, black and white answer to it. Anyway, so my cousin asked her to go to Iran on a goodwill trip. And she said to him she would go if I was sent along with her as her guide, you know, companion, and he agreed to that. And so we went off to Iran. There's me. Everyone says I look like Borat there. But I'm glad I don't anymore. I like the white hair more. So we went all around Iran. We went to all the sites, Persepolis, Shiraz, Isfahan, Tehran, and she shopped in the bazaars. She bought all these fabrics and costumes and really had a great time visiting the sites. But we were like tourists, you know. I had a camera, she had a camera. We just took photos of each other. There was no intention of ever publishing any of these photos. It was just like two friends taking photos of each other. And so this is when she liked to put on her own makeup for hours and hours and hours. This was when we were staying at the Shah Abbas Hotel. It's no longer a Shah. There's no longer a Shah attached to it, but it's still there. And in fact, my wife, Beth, who's here somewhere, she went to Iran this last year and stayed at that same hotel in the same suite. So she could have her photo taken and sent to me. We went to the mosque, and as you can see here, you know, her eyes really do give her away, although nobody there knew who she was. But the funny thing about this is in those days, back in 1976, both men and women could go into the same mosque. You didn't have the problems you have now with all the strict rules that the Islamic Republic has set up. And this is at Persepolis, where again you can see, you know, she's attired in her hippie outfit, very casual. No movie star stuff about her. Her hair isn't really done. But she was having a great time. And there she is taking photo herself. And that's Arthur Bruckel, her hairdresser, who was on the trip with us, taking a photo of her. Okay, so now that we're here, I got to read you another little story. And it includes a friend of mine who is here, who lives in Fort Lauderdale. His name is Amir, and he was in Iran at that point. So the next day, my friend Amir was going to take us on a tour to see the crown jewels at the Central Bank of Iran. Elizabeth had been looking forward to this outing from the start. Amir and I were waiting for her in the lobby, and as we were chatting, I noticed his eyes wander off towards the stairway, at which point a bewildered look appeared on his face. Trying to see the book above and below the mic. Sorry. I turned to see Elizabeth descending, followed by Arthur, her hairdresser, who was looking extremely proud of himself. He'd taken one of the cotton fabrics Elizabeth had purchased at the bazaar and had wrapped it turban-like around her head. I ran over and whispered to her, "Please take it off." "But why? I think it's beautiful," she protested. "Elizabeth, please trust me. It's not a scarf. You're wearing a tablecloth on your head. People here will think you're nuts." Still protesting, she obliged, returned to her room, and reappeared a few minutes later, sans turban, and we set off for the central bank. Upon entering the vault, we were awestruck by the vast quantity of unset precious gems, jewel-encrusted thrones, crowns, tiaras, swords, shields, and countless sparkling stones piled up on plates. It was a vast, dark, quiet room filled with security guards, and the only lighting coming from the spotlights focused on the magnificent jewels. At one point, a captivated Elizabeth turned her ring around on her finger and whispered to Amir that she felt embarrassed by the size of the crop diamond, which looked like a grain of sand next to the mounds of diamonds displayed in trays around the room. Back at the hotel, inspired by all that she had seen, Elizabeth asked that I take some photos of her in the outfits she'd purchased at the bazaar. In order to do justice to the colorful costumes, Arthur and I decided to alter the background in the living room of her suite. We rummaged through the shopping bags and decided to tape up a bunch of silk scarves on the wall, then draped a vault of sequined fabrics over the sofa. I went to my room to load up my camera with a roll of film. But before returning to her suite, I paused to think. Up to that point, there had been no pressure on me, as I was simply taking casual snapshots of Elizabeth. Having her get dressed up and pose on a set carried with it a far more professional responsibility. This was not going to be like a minor portrait I'd done for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine. All of a sudden, I was having a panic attack. What if I did a lousy job? Not that she'd be upset, but it would show that I was not good enough to become a professional portrait photographer, and her approval was very important to me. But it was too late to change course now. Trying to think of a way to calm down and not look pathetic, I remembered that a friend had given me a joint at a party a few nights prior, which I had slipped into my pocket. I went through my clothes, found the joint, and without thinking twice, fired it up and took a few puffs. I waited a minute or two, and when the herb took effect, I finally began to relax. I went back to Elizabeth's suite and waited for her, ready for the challenge. After a while, Elizabeth emerged from the bedroom, dressed in a sparkly tribal costume, accessorized by a headdress created by Arthur from one of the scarves. Dangling from her forehead was the famous Taj Mahal diamond. Let's see. There it is. A gift from Richard Burton. Pleasantly stoned, I started having a Technicolor Hollywood of the 50s Arabian Nights moment, reminiscent of the movies I'd seen as a kid in Iran. Elizabeth stretched out on the sofa, adjusted her pose, and looked into my lens. Once again, she was camera ready. Her presentation, enhanced by the costume and the diamond, didn't warrant any direction from me. And so without saying a word, I looked through the eyepiece and began snapping away. She changed her pose slightly each time she heard a few clicks of the shutter. Without saying a word, I kept pressing that button and looking through my lens at this extraordinarily beautiful woman who had in the past sat for the likes of Richard Avedon, Bert Stern, and Cecil Beaton. Here she was, without any fuss, giving me one of the most memorable moments of my life. There she is. Anyway, we had this amazing trip, and we came back, and the relationship between her and my cousin didn't really last. But I was fortunate in that she and John Warner had struck up a relationship. They fell in love, and she moved to Washington and married John. Can you hear me? The mic sounds like it's... Is it good? Is it okay? Okay. So she moved to Washington. I was very happy about that because that's where I was living. And our friendship just got, stronger and stronger every day. I would hang out with her. I'd go watch old movies. She'd tell me about old Hollywood and who did what to whom, etc. And then, but I wasn't having much of a success as a photographer. I wasn't making much money. And it got to the point that with pressure from my family that I got to get a real job, I thought of maybe going back to the diplomatic service or anything just to make some money. So I decided to go back to Iran. But so I went to see her and to tell her this. And she said, "Don't go back yet. I'm making a movie in Hollywood. You can come as my photographer and make some money and take some time and think about things." And she picked up the phone, called up the producer, and made the deal herself for me to go to Hollywood with her. So in 1978, in the summer of 1978, I left Washington and went to Hollywood with Elizabeth Taylor. And then I met a lady that I fell in love with. And with Elizabeth's encouragement, I married this young lady. And we had a son. And it's a good thing I didn't go back to Iran. The stories are in the book. If you get the book, you'll read them. Because soon after I got married, 2 months after I got married in late 78, the regime in Iran fell and the Islamic Republic took over. So if I'd gone back, I would have been in a lot of trouble. Anyway, so let's see, what have we got next? One of the things that I did, this is the first time I'd been on a film set. She was in Vienna and doing a film called A Little Night Music. And this is before, actually, we went to Hollywood. And she invited me to come along. And this was the first time I'd been on a film set. It was very exciting to see this magnificent film set and people in costumes and seeing directors and costume people and makeup people and grips and people moving things around. It was just like a fantasy for me to be on a film set. And I took a bunch of photos of her, this being one of them. That is one of my favorites from back in 1976. And that summer, we went back, when we came back to the States, I got her to become friends with Warhol. She had a thing. She wasn't crazy about Andy. There's a big story about it in the book. You can read. But I got them to become friendly. And he invited her to go up to his compound in Montauk. And there we were. He couldn't come because he had to go to Europe to do some portraits and make lots of money. And so she and I and some friends were there. And as you can see, she was just like one of the gang. I mean, I know she had this image, or the image that's been projected of her, of the woman with the jewelry and the husbands and the glamour and all that. But really, she was very down to earth. And the reason I did this book, at first I was just going to do a book of photographs. But when she passed away and I was reading all these obituaries by these tabloids and newspapers about you know, the many-time married Elizabeth Taylor with all the jewelry, blah, blah, blah. It really got me ticked off, and I said, you know what, there's this other side to her people have to know about. And so I added the stories that go along with the photographs in the book. Because, you know, all these wonderful things happened. I had all these great experiences with her, doing things that normal people do, that she did, that, you know, I guess people didn't think she did. It's like when people say, you know, does the Queen of England go to the bathroom? Yes, she does, you know. She did regular things too. So this was her having fun playing softball in Montauk. And this was her cooking, well, or cooking once. This was on the farm, John Warner's farm. And we would go there some weekends, and she would be in her nightie, in a dressing gown, and be making fried chicken, which was one of her favorite dishes. And we would sit around, and she would entertain us. There was always some game we would play, like charades or something like that. But that's her stepdaughter, who, one of the things I learned from Elizabeth was that, you know, she remained friends with everybody. This was Richard Burton's daughter, Kate Burton, great actress. And at that point, you know, she was sort of newly divorced from Richard, but she was very close to her stepchildren as well. And years later, she became very close with Carrie Fisher. And I'm sure you're all aware of the Eddie Fisher saga. But, you know, Elizabeth was just warm, compassionate, loving, and, you know, you couldn't help but adore her. And this is her driving us around in the pickup truck on the farm. That's her daughter, Liza. And this is when we went to Los Angeles for the movie she was making, which was called Return Engagement. I think Bonnie got it wrong earlier when she said it was Little Night Music. But anyway, this was a TV movie she did in summer of '78. This is the one she got me the job on. She basically took the part. It was a little movie for television, but she took the part because she was already fed up in Washington. It wasn't her place. She wasn't happy there. And it was the time when she was eating too much, drinking too much, doing all this stuff she shouldn't be doing. And she wasn't looking good. So she needed to get out of there, and we went there to LA. I had a great time. 6 weeks at the Beverly Hills Hotel for me at that point was being like in heaven, especially with Elizabeth. A few years later, I always landed up taking photos of her putting on makeup. This was backstage when she was doing Little Foxes on Broadway. This was, you know, she would help get me jobs. This was in the beginning of, so, you know, I'd just gotten married. We had a kid. I wasn't making much money. So she would, you know, get me jobs now and again. And this was one of the jobs she got me to work with her for a magazine. She, as I said earlier, she wasn't happy in Washington. She was doing all the wrong things. She decided to leave John. She came to LA. She got divorced. She went to rehab. She lost weight. She got to look beautiful all over again. This was in the mid-'80s. And she's wearing her Legion of Honor medal there, given to her by the French government. And this is what she looked like after, you know, all the problems she'd had in Washington once she cleaned up her bad habits. And then, you know, the movie roles were not really coming her way, and she really wasn't that interested in films anymore. I mean, she'd won all these Oscars making these brilliant films. And for a middle-aged actress back then, this is the 80s, there really wasn't many roles. And, you know, today you have a lot of TV, and a lot of actresses and actors move on to TV because they do great stuff on TV. But back then, you know, you had Hallmark Hall of Fame Movie of the Month, you know, that's what you would land up getting. So she decided to heck with it. She would do a little movie or a little bit here and a little bit there, but she started a fantastic perfume business, and she made millions and millions of dollars out of it. And this is her holding a couple of her bottles of her perfume there. I did this as an editorial for a magazine called Premiere. And the day I was doing this, one of the reasons I chose to do this shoot was I had talked Vanity Fair into doing a cover story on her. And they had come back and said, we would do it if she will hold up a condom in her hand. Now, the reason for that being that in the mid-'80s, she lost one of her best friends, Rock Hudson, to AIDS. And I can see a few faces here who are over 20 years old. And so back in the 80s, the whole issue of AIDS was, you know, very scary, very dramatic. People treated it like a major plague. Nobody wanted to go near anybody with AIDS. I mean, it was rough times for people who were suffering from that disease. She was the first major celebrity to stand up and say something about that. To stand up, she made Reagan say the word AIDS. She stood up in front of the Senate, in front of the UN. She talked to pharmaceutical companies. She got all the drugs that were, well, she helped get the drugs that were needed to help with the issue of AIDS. And she wasn't scared of losing her reputation. I mean, this is, these days, right now, it's very trendy for celebrities to stand up and have a cause like Haiti or the environment or whatever, which is great. But everybody else is behind those. At the time she stood up and talked about AIDS, you know, you could have lost your reputation because nobody else was doing that. Not only was she talking about it, but she was holding people, hugging people, treating them, you know, these people who had gotten AIDS, she treated them with compassion. And so anyway, I talked Vanity Fair into doing a cover, and they wanted her to do the cover holding a condom, which was sort of embarrassing for me because I thought, are they trying to make fun of her, or is this going to be humiliating or silly? And for me, it was embarrassing. I mean, people weren't really talking condoms at that point, you know, I mean, so I approached through her publicist because I didn't want to ask her directly. You know, she was like family to me, and, you know, as I sort of said before, it was like going to your mother and saying, can you hold a condom? So I talked to her publicist, and she came back and said, Elizabeth said it's fine. So there she is, holding a condom. So this was a test shoot I did for not knowing how I was going to do the cover for the magazine. And it was kind of awkward because I was feeling very awkward. She didn't care. I mean, she was having fun with it. But I sent this image to the art director at Vanity Fair, and then he came back with some instructions of, you know, let's do it with a different setup and don't hold it up there. So this landed up being the cover of Vanity Fair. Very stylish, very, you know, beautiful, elegant, and the whole purpose was to encourage people to have safe sex. And it was a successful cover for them, and it was a successful message for everybody else. And I'm very proud of this. And at that point, in fact, you know, the image being so controversial, I had a lot of other magazines coming to me to buy the image from me to use in their magazines. And I said to Elizabeth, I'm going to offer it to 3 top publications. And I'm talking 1992, so that's, you know, many years ago. I said, I'm going to ask each of them for $25,000, and you're going to get all of that money for your AIDS Foundation. Sure enough, I got 3 major publications overseas who offered the money, so I gave her a check for $75,000. Thank you. Because I thought it was just, you know, she had so much courage. You know, she didn't have fear. And that's one of the things she taught me was not to be afraid and not to be, you know, worried about, you know, taking a step in a direction I wanted to take. And if I was going to fail, I should stand up and go again and, you know, try and succeed at what I was doing. She had no fears, and bless her. I mean, you know, she was a major force there. And this was when we went to Amsterdam. She went all over the place, you know, talking about AIDS. This was at an AIDS conference back in '92. And she had lost several people close to her, to AIDS. So, she was very passionate about it. And when we took time off, she could have a good laugh. This was in the south of France when we went for Cinema Against AIDS and she with AMFAR. This is just prior to her starting her own AIDS foundation, and she was a spokesperson for AMFAR. And, she could relax and have fun and wear silly hats and look beautiful, taking a rest on the back of a yacht with her dog Sugar, who looks like she's about to fly off. This is a portrait I took of her. Actually, I zoomed in on this. I did a shoot for the cover of French Vogue with her. And I've always loved this image in a selfish way because I can see myself in her pupils. So it's my self-portrait through Elizabeth Taylor. And this image actually is a limited edition image that has sold quite well. And I sold one of them at one of the fundraisers for her foundation, and it raised a lot of money. So in the book, you'll see lots of at-home photos. This is her again with Sugar at home in Bel Air. And and this is her with her Oscars. This was actually shot for a magazine, but one of the things that's very interesting about her, and you compare her to actresses who started young today, child actresses. She started as a child actress when she was very young, with a very pushy stage mother. And she was always in front of a camera. And she wanted to rebel and not be an actress when she was in her late teens, but her mother pushed her to stay in films. And she was 18 when she did A Place in the Sun. And I think it was just a couple of years later that she was in Giant. She was maybe in her early 20s. And the funny thing is that the actors playing her children, where some of them were older than her, like Dennis Hopper and Carol Baker. But, she did a great job in that film. She was pretty much like a feminist in that film. She took great roles early on in her career. And, until I think the last major role she did that everybody loved was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But, in the 70s, actresses in their 40s were not really getting anything substantial in roles. They had to be somebody's mother or grandmother or a lawyer. And these days, you have people like Meryl Streep in their mid to late 60s who are still superstars. Diane Keaton, a whole bunch of them. Charlotte Rampling just got nominated for an Oscar. She's in her 70s. But in those days, it was tough for good roles, for actresses. But regardless, she won all of these Oscars. And she went through all those scandals. And she pulled through it all. And she became a successful business person and also the major spokesperson for AIDS. And you compare her to, I'm going to name them because I don't think, is there a camera? Is there a TV camera here? I hope not. Like the Lindsay Lohans of today, who started, I photographed Lindsay Lohan when she was very young on Parent Trap. She was this cute little kid. And I thought, what a cute little kid. And I'm thinking these days, what a nightmare, she's grown up with all these problems. Every time you pick up the tabloid, she's done something awful. Some of them just don't get over it, and they're very self-centered. But Elizabeth was totally different. She wasn't self-centered. She saw a purpose in her life beyond herself. She found a cause, and to the very end, she strove to, do her best in getting funds and setting up her AIDS Foundation. And to this day, we're raising money for her AIDS Foundation, and my proceeds from the book go to her AIDS Foundation. So that is why she's so admirable. This is her having fun at home with her good friend Roddy McDowell, who was a child actor alongside her since, they were, I don't know how young. I think there was a movie they were in together. What was it? Lassie, something like that. Anyway, so this was at home in Bel Air, and he was having fun, and she was like putting on a Persian look for her, actually. And this is one of my favorite photos of her, because I always used to make fun of her hairdos, which used to like pile up to here. And this was after her brain surgery. She had a little tumor removed, and they shaved off her hair. And as you can see, when the focus is just on the face and those eyes, with minimum makeup, I mean, she looks absolutely beautiful. And she was in her mid-60s at that point. Just absolutely stunning. And so I got to be her escort. She asked me to go to the White House for the Millennium Dinner with her. And I thought I was going to be seated with her, and she thought I was going to be seated with her. But this greedy fellow, who you can see in that photo, decided he wanted to be surrounded by the world's most beautiful women. So I was like led to another table, and she sat with him and Sophia Loren. And this is her again at home, having fun, you know, dressed casually, dancing for my camera. We had so many good times at her house. Every Sunday she would do a brunch and invite all sorts of people, not just celebrities. Maybe there'd be 2 or 3 celebrities, but it would be family, friends, children, grandchildren. She even had great-grandchildren. They'd be running through the rooms, jumping in the pool. It was like being in a suburban house. And then, I mean, she could get all dressed up. This was shot for Vanity Fair, for the Hollywood issue. And I wanted to do a photograph of her, actually take her in the car like this to Hollywood, and during the day, and be in a car in front of her and photograph her as she's being driven through the streets of Hollywood. However, we got there like 10 in the morning to get things organized. By the time she came downstairs, it was 8 p.m. and it was freezing cold. It was January, and believe it or not, LA does get cold. And she ran into the car, said, okay, take a roll of film, let's get this over with. So that's from one roll of film, basically. And she gave me that look, and I got her butler to dress as a chauffeur, and I put on sunglasses on him just to give it a little drama. And when she got out of the car to run back into the house, she turned around to me and sort of scowled and said, Sunset Boulevard. And I'm trying to think, what's she talking about? And I realized she thought I was trying to make her look like Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, which was not my intention. But there is a little bit, I mean, visually similarity, but not personality-wise. So in 2010, I was approached by the curator of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And she asked me if I had, she was the curator of Islamic art, said, do you have photographs of Iran prior to the revolution? And I had left Iran when I was a kid, and I'd only gone back 3 times. And the last time was in 1976 with Elizabeth. I said, you know what? I don't think I have what you want, but I have some photos of Elizabeth Taylor in Iran. She said, send them to me. So I sent her the photos, and it wasn't just Elizabeth. It was also, you know, we were in the bazaar and all over the place, so I took some other additional photos. And she said, wow, we like these. We want to do a show with these. So I was thrilled to get a museum show. You know, I mean, how many people get a museum show? And that with photographs of Elizabeth. And at this point, you know, Elizabeth was 78 years old. She wasn't doing well. She had a lot of health issues. And I called her up, very excited, and told her about this. And she said, great. And I said, will you come to the opening? She said, sure. Unfortunately, by the time the show went up, she was in the hospital. And that was in February 2011. And I had asked them to start the show on her birthday. I wanted it to be a birthday present to her on the 27th of February. But she was in the hospital, she couldn't make it. And sadly, less than a month later, she died. So she never got to see the show, but I felt like this was my tribute, and thank you to her for you know, this journey that I took with her, not just to Iran, but throughout 35 years of my life. And actually, just when she was in the hospital, Architectural Digest asked me to photograph her home. This is her home. And as you can see, it's not a movie star home. It's just a simple ranch-style house in the hills of Bel Air. It used to belong to Nancy Sinatra at some point, and some person bought it and, did a little bit of work to it. And, it's nice, but it's simple, And so the day I started shooting, her assistant had told me that, Elizabeth we had rearranged the bedroom downstairs. There was a second floor where Elizabeth's suite was, her bedroom, her dressing room and bathroom and all that. And because she couldn't really walk up and down anymore, we decided to turn a bedroom downstairs into her bedroom. So we brought down all her favorite stuff. And this is the living room, by the way. She had great art, by the way. Her father had been an art dealer, and he had a gallery at the Beverly Hills Hotel, I believe. So with his advice, she'd collected some great art. The sculptures on the right side, those horses, are by her daughter, Liza, who's a brilliant artist. And there's a little Warhol and a Hockney there. And then you have quite a good selection of Impressionist art and 20th century, early 20th century art, but all, cluttered together. And all was sold at Christie's. So anyway, we rearranged everything, and we created her bedroom downstairs, and I was photographing upstairs. They hadn't moved her dressing room downstairs yet. I was photographing her dressing room upstairs, and as I was doing this photograph, her publicist came in and said, "Firooz, you have to stop now." And I thought, great, Elizabeth's coming back home, because they kept saying she's going to come back home any day. And I thought, they didn't want a crew of photographer and assistants and editors, etc. there. So I was very happy. I thought she was coming back home. I said, "Oh, she's coming back home." And the publicist said, "No, she's dying. She's really dying." And it was like so shocking and so upsetting for me. And so I packed up all my stuff and we left. And sure enough, like 2 a.m, the next day she died. And it was a very sad, sad, sad day for me. This was the bedroom we created downstairs. With, some of her favorite collections and photographs of her family. And the painting on the right is something she did as a teenager herself. And the black and white photographs over there, her father and mother when they were younger. And I will go back to that. I will rest on that image, but I'm going to read you one more story just so that it's not ending on a sad note. It's not this one. Let me find it. Okay. So when she took me to LA with her, and we were staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel, she made sure that Edith Head, who was like one of the most famous costume designers in Hollywood, she'd won Oscars for various films, and she was great friends with Elizabeth. She made sure that Edith did the costumes for the movie. And then Edith invited Elizabeth to come stay at her house, this beautiful house, over the weekend whilst we took a break from the film. So I'm going to read you this one last story here. One weekend during a break from filming, Edith had invited Elizabeth to come stay at her house. Edith and her husband, a respected Hollywood art director, lived in a magnificent Spanish hacienda on Coldwater Canyon in Beverly Hills. The guest house had been a refuge for Elizabeth in the past, and they had placed a plaque with her name on its door. I was invited over for lunch on Saturday, and as we were finishing our meal, the maid came in and informed Elizabeth that her visitors had arrived. It turned out that Gianni Bozzacchi, an Italian producer friend of Elizabeth's, was in town, I wanted to introduce her to the renowned director, Michelangelo Antonioni. Meeting the director of Blow Up was an awesome prospect. So when he walked in, I stood, offered him my seat, and I retreated to the back of the room, content to be just a fly on the wall. Soon I sensed that Elizabeth was not overwhelmed by Antonioni's presence. He came across as distant and snobbish. Perhaps he was waiting for Elizabeth to fawn over him, but instead, Elizabeth, who hadn't bothered putting on makeup and was still in her dressing gown, simply continued to calmly eat her lunch. After some chit-chat, it became evident that Antonioni was unimpressed by the run-of-the-mill TV movie Elizabeth was doing, and asked what other projects she had in the works. "I'll be playing Jocasta in Jean Cocteau's The Infernal Machine," she replied very casually. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. A few years back, I'd read Cocteau's surreal and provocative play about the relationship between Oedipus and his wife/mother, Jocasta, and I thought it would make a great film. At some point, I told Elizabeth about it. She'd sparked to the idea of playing Jocasta. And when Elizabeth and I visited the ruins of Persepolis in Iran, I mentioned that it was the perfect location to shoot the film. We got all excited about the idea, but soon forgot about it as I had no training as a filmmaker, and Elizabeth was busy falling in love with John Warner. "Oh, really? And who's going to direct it?" Antonioni asked in his thick Italian accent, now intrigued and sitting up in his chair. "We're going to make the film in the ruins of Persepolis, which is just so beautiful," Elizabeth said. "But who's going to direct it?" he repeated impatiently. "The whole look and the feel of the story is so surreal," Elizabeth continued. "But who's going to direct it?" His voice had grown shrill. Elizabeth, still choosing to ignore his question, continued to casually provide more details about the project. Just when he looked like he was about to explode, she stopped and, turning her face towards me, said, "Oh, the director? Firooz, of course." The great Antonioni, who hadn't paid any attention to me up to that point, slowly turned and gave me a withering look. I glanced over to Elizabeth and saw a deliciously wicked smile on her face. Of course, we never made our film, but Elizabeth did get Mr. Antonioni to acknowledge my existence. So if you have questions, very few, I think we're sort of out of time, but a few questions? Anyone? Yes.
Of all your wonderful personal accounts, I was just curious if there was any one particular moment when you first fell in love with her.
I fell in love with her repeatedly. No, I mean, when I say I fell in love with, it wasn't, it was like family love. It was like your mom. It was like, she was just so nice and so good that I just had this continuous, love for her, respect, love, admiration. Yes?
She just had one daughter?
No, she had 2 sons and 2 daughters. One of them her own, and one was adopted.
What kind of mother was she?
She was a great mother. I mean, early on, when she had the boys and Liza, she had 2 sons by Michael Wilding Sr. when she was in her early 20s. And she had Liza Todd from Mike Todd a little later on, a few years after that. And, she was working all the time. And then Mike Todd died, and, he left her in debt, believe it or not. So she had to work. And so the kids had nannies. They had to be looked after. And you have to understand, Elizabeth was in her 20s at that point. And she wasn't a housewife. It wasn't like, she had all the time in the world to look after the kids. So in the beginning, she had help. And her son, Christopher, who's a good friend of mine, he's, I've known him forever and I adore him. I said to him, if I talk about you, your mother, and you guys, what can I say about those years when she wasn't around? And he said, you know, the best thing was that when she wasn't around, she made sure we were with great people to look after us. So when I got to know Elizabeth, I mean, her kids were always around her. And I became great friends with all of them. And she was a great mom at that point. I mean, she was spending a lot of time with the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And she really looked after them, you know, in many ways.
Hello? May I have a question.
I'm sorry,
Did you know that when, I guess you know, when her jewels were up for auction, the picture that you took of the jewel is in the catalog? I was so amazed when I saw it.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 of them.
Yeah.
They're brilliant.
Actually, there's several photos of mine in the
I
catalog.
painted
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I loved it so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Where was your final resting place? Was it
Where she's buried? No. Believe it or not, it's where Michael Jackson is buried, but nothing to do with him. I'm blanking out on the name. It's in Glendale. It's a place in Glendale. Yeah. But she had to, you know, she converted to Judaism, so she had to be buried straight away. It was a very small ceremony, and I was there. But it was, you know, she had instructed people to wait because for everything to start late because she was always late. I mean, even to the end, her humor was there. Yes, anybody else?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I just want to say I really love your photography, and
Thank
I
you.
admire your relationship with her. I wanted to know, do you guys, did you share a special song together and a movie that you enjoyed together?
Did we share what together?
A special song and a movie together that you enjoyed?
A special movie together. You know, I mean, when we're in Washington, I had very little work, and she wasn't happy at being like a senator's wife, so I'd hang out with her in her bedroom, and she'd have a drink, I'll have a drink, you know, hey, what can I tell you? And we would watch TV, old movies on TV. And, you know, we would make fun of certain people, or she would tell me stories about certain people. I don't know if we shared liking for the same movie, but I learned a lot from her about some of the actors and actresses that she had worked with. I mean, this is a woman who worked with James Dean, you know, and Montgomery Clift, and you name it, all these, Paul Newman. I mean, you know, these were icons. I'm glad to say I got to work with Paul Newman when he was 80, and I was thrilled to do that. But she would just tell me funny stories about some of them, and not so funny stories about some of the other ones. But I'll share one story that's in the book. After Mike Todd died, and she was filming Butterfield 8 when he died, and she had to go finish the film, you know, when this tragedy happened. But she got an Oscar for the film, despite the fact that she later married Eddie Fisher, and that whole scandal with Eddie and Debbie and blah, blah, blah. By the way, he was not the best husband, and even Debbie Reynolds has said that, and he wasn't the best father. So at that point, it was scandalous that she went off with Eddie Fisher. But so she told me the story that she was in New York with Eddie Fisher at the hotel, exhausted, and you know, they were promoting the film Butterfield 8, and so she was in the tub taking a bath late at night, and the phone rings, and she tells Eddie to pick it up in the other room. And he picks it up and comes up to her and says, "It's for you and Fox, and they want you to play Cleopatra." And she says, "Oh, you know, nah, I don't want to do that." And he goes back and speaks to the people at Fox and comes back and forth. And she finally shouts at the top of her lungs so that they can hear on the phone at the other end. Says, "Tell them I'll do it if they'll give me $1 million. So after a little bit, Eddie Fisher comes back and says, "They'll give you $1 million." And that was the first time an actor or an actress got $1 million for a movie, and that was 1959, 1960. So she started a whole trend. Thank you.
Okay. Hello?
Yes. Oh.
So she was great friends with Michael Jackson. Did she ever tell you any stories or what she really thought of Michael Jackson?
I can't hear.
She was good friends with Michael Jackson.
Yes.
Did she ever tell you any stories about what she really thought of Michael or who he really was? Because he also had a public and a private persona.
You know, one of the reasons I had a great friendship with Elizabeth was because I never asked her anything like that. Like, why this, why that, you know, what do you think of this person, what do you think? If she volunteered information to me, I'd take it, but I'm not into gossip and all that sort of stuff. Things go into one ear and out the other ear. Please, you know, you can ask my wife. I can't remember a thing. But she didn't say, I mean, she would say things about Michael, but I didn't really pay attention to that relationship. I know she cared for him because he had gone through a similar childhood as hers, you know, that he had to work as a kid and never had a proper childhood, like the way, you know, like she didn't have a proper childhood. Always having to work and having pressure from a parent, you know, to work and not getting the kind of schooling that would have been appropriate. So, but I met him a few times with her, but and as much as I liked his music, I wasn't that intrigued by him as a person. He had too much makeup on. I didn't ask questions about him. Sorry if I can't give you any more info than that.
Well, thank you so much, Firooz, and I know there's a lot more questions.
Okay. Thank you.
What do you love about Elizabeth Taylor? I got to meet her on 2 occasions. Once in New York City at the Four Seasons restaurant, and again in Washington, D.C. At the Names Project, where she was the benefactress for that. Very kind, endearing woman, person, individual. And I think that that's what Mr. Zahedi brought through in his lecture and his knowing her.
And this book is for me and my daughter.
Oh, Charlize, like Pharaoh.
Yeah. It's got a cannon.
Are you an Elizabeth Taylor fan?
Yes, she's amazing. Who isn't?
Yeah. Did you enjoy the lecture?
Yeah, it was amazing. Tremendous insight into her life.
It's great. You bought a book?
Yes.
Oh, very nice. Look at that. Hey, look at that. Are you an Elizabeth Taylor fan?
Absolutely, and my cousin looks exactly like her, and wherever she goes, she gets that. Oh, you look just like Elizabeth
What did you
Taylor.
like about Elizabeth Taylor?
She was so elegant and sweet and soft-spoken, just a beauty. I loved her fashion and her jewelry. Yes.
Did you like the lecture?
Yes, he was so fascinating. It was really nice. What a nice opportunity to learn all that backstory.